Well, salam, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Welcome, everyone. On behalf of the Auliya Council of North America, we're continuing with the Marataba series for the Irfan and Ehsan channel. And we have with us again our beloved Dr. Afra Jalabi, who is our Arab Canadian scholar, an activist, a writer, an artist, and a dear friend who lives in Montreal. And today, our conversation that we are having in contemplating the message of the Quran Sharif, we are going to be talking about justice and compassion. So we'll start with what I understand the Arabic word for justice is adal, right, which is one of the names of God, Afra. And there are many, many verses on that. So I will let you share your wisdom and knowledge with us and your understanding from the Quran. And then we will continue our conversation.
Assalamu alaikum, my dear friend Asma, and assalamu alaikum, everyone. Yes, the Quran is predicated on a very, very central message, the message of justice. And it is also presented within a kind of a cosmology of the universe, that things are always in balance. And that when we deviate from this balance, we hurt ourselves and things go awry. So there's the message that we need to remain in, like, within these parameters of divine laws, the divine laws that govern the universe. It is, if we look in a subtle way deeply into it, it's pretty much not aligned with the Western message that emphasizes and centralizes freedom. Whereas the Quranic message centralizes on the idea of surrender to the will of God. So it's not that whatever I want to do, I will do, and there are no consequences. The Quran tells us that God allows us to commit sins and to do horrible things, but eventually they have consequences. So it's not that when somebody deviates from justice or from truth, that immediately there is a consequence. Rather, that they could actually prosper and get away with murder, but that eventually the Quran emphasizes that there are always consequences in dunya and in akhirah. And so, for example, one of the strong statements that was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad when he heard the first Surah Iqra, read in the name of your Lord. One of the problematic issues that was stated in that surah is Innal insana la yatgha, that a human being, insan, the historical trajectory of our species, that we have a propensity to oppress, to commit injustices. Yatgha in Arabic, طغيان, is actually tyranny, that we have a propensity to control, to overpower things, and to put things under our influence. And so, and that's presented as the malaise of humanity. So therefore, the solution is also presented in that surah, is to be able to disobey that kind of order and that way of living. لا تطعه واسجد واقترب. Disobey that and come closer to us. It says, the divine voice. Come close to God.
Like Raha Fiddin, there's no oppression there's no compulsion in religion. I know we talked a little about that. So it's the same concept of our tendency to want to dominate, whether it's our nafs, our ego, that, you know, the story going back to Abel and Cain, where the first injustice, in a sense, the first killing took place. So, you know, to elaborate on the fact that there is a balance, you know, we have, like from Surah Rahman, وَالسَّمَاءَ رَفَعَهَا وَوَضَعَ الْمِيزَانَ أَلَّا تَطْغَوْا فِي الْمِيزَانِ. So keeping that balance. And in this time, what are some of the ways, Afra, that one can implement this or internalize this? Because we tend to go to extremes, and we see this rise of extremism. We feel emotional, we go to extremes, we react, and keeping that balance and center, how challenging that is for us, and yet it is a divine command.
Yes, you see, like we complain about the oppression and in the injustices of a Western hegemonic world order and of white supremacy, but also the reason we become subjected to these things, that we as nations have been for decades living in corruption, in militarism, and we've I mean, in the Middle East or in other countries, as you well know, people have killed each other. I mean, the images that are coming out of Gaza, that so hard to breaking. Similar images came out of Syria, out of Yemen, out of Libya the last several years. So it's extremely important to also be responsible morally and accountable, and to do istighfar and to really repent, and to look at our sins. And why have we become so subjected to injustices injustices? And we need to look at the kind of injustices we also subject other people, our neighbors, our brothers and sisters. It is now like everybody's very, very angry with Israel, and rightly so, because it's on a rampage of killing civilian Palestinians. But so did the Assad regime, Iran, and Hezbollah, who are now sitting like self-restrained in front of Israel and the United States. When the Syrian people, they also used violent means to rebel against a dictatorship. Unfortunately, Iran came to actually support Assad, and first, initially, actually, Hezbollah militias came into the country. And just a few years earlier, when Israel was attacking Lebanon, many Syrian families had hosted a lot of the Iranian Shia and followers of Hezbollah. And years later, these same families found themselves being attacked by Hezbollah forces. So we can't just look at one kind of injustice and not look at the injustices that we also commit against each other. We need to examine our moral failures, and also the means of correcting injustices, like what Hamas did. Sadly, I know it was a desperate act. It was a measure to draw attention to their cause. But I mean, it's also not very Islamic when you think about it. Attacking families and elderly women. It's very sad.
Exactly.
It's not common with the way Israel does business than the way actually the way we need to resist injustice. But we can people to be superhuman. As you know, like the American scholar Norman Finkelstein said recently, Syrians also lived under a brutal dictatorship. And this is what the Quran discusses when it discusses like oppressed nations who don't find a way, who don't have solution, who don't have power. And so this is a very strategic question. What do these people do to actually lift the oppression that they're subjugated to? This is actually the major problem that the Quran presents. And whereas Western civilization is very much interested in freedom and control. I mean, the whole scientific paradigm is not to actually just solve problems, but to control nature, to control others. And most powerful Western nations are sitting on huge arsenals of nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction. And so it seems like history is waiting for nations who will come and really align to the message of justice and to become instrumental in reducing suffering and reducing oppression and aligning to justice in our world. It's really difficult, the things we are seeing.
So one of the things I was reading in the Quran about how the emphasis is on knowledge and the pursuit of it being so valuable, because intellectual well-being is very important. And it's profound because you need justice with emphasis and compatibility with knowledge and faith. I think what happens is the knowledge, you get brainwashed, you get information and your knowledge is altered. So the place of getting knowledge, justice, and then I guess compassion, or, being truly just, being able to adhere to justice, for that is nearer to piety, even if it's, not to be operating from hatred of a certain people. Because once the hatred comes in and the emotional response, and then you see yourself being just back because it happened to you, an eye for an eye, and the danger of that happening, Afra. So how do we work through this?
Yeah, knowledge could not be separated from power. And that's what was one of the contributions of the French philosopher Michel Foucault, who really looked at the ways truth functions in society as a means of legitimating structures of power. Because, I mean, people don't come and say we are barbarians and we just kill you. They say we are civilized and all the whole colonial enterprise, Western colonial enterprise in the world, was to either save brown women from brown men, or to educate people, or to civilize them, while they were actually taking away their resources and their land. So there's always a certain discourse of knowledge that accompanies power structures. And so that's why it is very, very important that we examine and we listen to different sides of arguments. Notice how today in the world, they attempt to arrest the movement of language. Like, even when people say ceasefire, which is a positive word, that which is to stop the bombardment of civilian people, people get accused of anti-Semitism, even saying positive words. And the Jewish German philosopher who had, after the Holocaust, emigrated to the United States, Hannah Arendt, who did actually, she's one of the 20th century authorities on authoritarianism and totalitarianism. She said that one of the means of power structures to really subjugate critical voices and other perspectives is to arrest the movement of language, because that's what Nazi Germany did, for example. Although she said language was rich, it had a rich philosophical tradition. I mean, look how the West is a very rich culture. It has supposedly these democratic forms of self-expression and freedom. And yet in the last several weeks, we found ourselves being almost like people are silenced and they can't express different worldviews. This is very much against also the Quranic notion or the Abrahamic religious teachings, because we're supposed to listen to the other. That even God himself allowed Satan to speak. Not only that, when Satan said, I shall seduce your creation to hell, لأغوينهم أجمعين, انظرني إلى يوم يبعثون, give me time until the day of resurrection to seduce humanity to hell. God said, you have respite, you go do your best. So it's that our universe is predicated on the idea of the multiplicity of perspectives. The angels objected to our creation and to our khilafah. They said, are you going to place upon earth those who will spread corruption and spill blood? So they also share their perspective. And the Quran, actually, the whole linguistic structure of the Quran unfolds dialogically, that even when you sit to read the Quran, there's a voice addressing you. So you enter into a conversation. And then all the stories are related to us through these different perspectives. So when you have the court of Pharaoh, for example, you have Moses, you have people who are objecting to Pharaoh, to Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh says other things. Then those who oppose Pharaoh also like present their views. Those who are with him present their views. So the Quranic stories, narratives unfold with multiplicity of perspectives, because the fusion and the coming together of all these perspectives fine-tunes truth. And the Quran uses another also, in addition to diversity and the sharing of different perspectives, the Quran uses the element of time to show who is truthful. It's not that in this very moment I say to you, Asmi, you are right, I'm wrong, or I'm right, you're wrong. It says, inna عاملون انتظروا إنا معكم من المنتظرين. Wait with us and we shall wait. اعملوا على مكانتكم إنا عاملون. Like, work on what you believe, we will work on what we believe, and we shall wait for the consequences. So the Quran introduces the dimension of time to see the results. So, and the Quran tells us also in our assessment of history to travel through the earth and see the consequences of bygone nations. سيروا في الأرض فانظروا كيف كان عاقبة الذين من قبلكم. Travel through the earth and see what happened, what was the consequences, the results of nations before you, civilizations before us. Because it will, and me emphasizes this in Mathnawi, how we don't learn from the lessons of those who have gone before us, because this is one of the central messages of the Quran. So we can't always discern truth just because it's my truth and it's your truth. So we have to look at the kind of belief systems, what kind of life forms these belief systems produce. Do they produce justice, compassion, coexistence? Or do my beliefs create death cults? The region, for example, we have to be honest with ourselves. It's not just Zionism that is a fascist ideological death cult. We have radical Sunnism that's like in ISIS, that's a death cult. We have radical Iranian theocracy that, with its militias, that's a death cult. They don't accept, Asmi, the coexistence with the other who has different views. And it's a region that is multi-religious, multi-ethnic, multi-historical, multi-sectarian. And you can have one ideology that says I have a monopoly of truth and everybody else will be eliminated physically through bombardment, because that's what Iran did in Syria, that's what Israel is doing in Gaza, that's what ISIS did in Iraq and Syria. These are dangerous ideologies because they do not accept the movement of language, they do not accept the movement of time, they don't have humility in addressing problems and solving problems strategically while giving attention to the sanctity of human life.
So justice, the concept of treating, loving God, and doing as not just the divine command, not just, I'm saying it is a divine command, but to implement it, treating others like you want to be treated, and to hold on to being just, even if it's against your own interest. And this is something that we are being guided to do, which we're not seeing happening in the Muslim world or the so-called Muslim governments who are actually not making decisions which they have to make for justice or something which is unfair and cruel, and what we're seeing now happening in Gaza, but they're looking out for their own interest. And this is such a straight message when people who claim to be following the Quran, and yet how difficult. I mean, we see the hypocrisy is one of the things that is becoming more blatant. And yet we are told to fight for the oppressed. That part of justice is urge Muslims to liberate the oppressed. When you have in Surah 4, verse 71, that, there is a call for us to speak out against oppression. So not just our own interest, but go ahead.
Exactly. Look at Judaism. I mean, the Psalms of David, for example, and Solomon, like those are so powerful and beautiful. And it says those who build their kingdoms on aggression and force, they shall like be strewn in the wind, like dust in the wind, like ashes. Christianity, it says you shall know the truth and the truth shall set you free. The Quran focuses so much on the idea that nations don't get destroyed unless they become unjust and oppressive. And so we are betraying our religious traditions. Judaism, for example, is a religion that is based on, the very notions of justice. The first peasants who stood in the face of Pharaoh, the archetypal image of Judaism is saying to Pharaoh, we are just like you, we are human beings. Because Pharaoh was saying, no, I am divine and you are just useless, completely like creatures without any value. And Judaism is a religion about justice, about the sanctity and the equality of all human life, and the compassion and the protection of the weak and the vulnerable and the strange. But Zionism is a very different. Zionism evolved as a secular ideology using some elements of Jewish identity, but it is a secular ethno-nationalist radical ideology that is dedicated to the creation of a nation state, which is a modern phenomena. And it's the same thing when you look at the Iranian theocracy as well. It's very different from original Shiism that is, again, dedicated to justice and to standing in the face of tyranny and to protect the weak and the vulnerable. And so contemporary theocratic Shiism now has become a dislike kind of, they were willingly went and cities, in their name, in around, the region. And ISIS, look at ISIS. They take, like Sunni ideology and turn it into an ethno-fascistic ideology. So we have to see how these ethno-fascist ideologies deviated from the religious teachings and traditions that emphasize justice and the golden rule that, in the hadith says, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. That none of you is of faith or a believer unless you love for your brother that which you love for yourself. The same thing in Christianity, in Judaism, in Buddhism, in Hinduism. And look what's happening to Hinduism in India, which is, again, a religion based on on aligning to the divine, on becoming enlightened and reaching nirvana. It's
And all
becoming,
the actual the manifestations of God, the tajalli, which they can, they're so inclusive. The original concepts
and even
have been
Buddhism
from the Upanishads.
educated on peace has sometimes tendencies in producing different forms of extremism. So these different forms of ethno death cults are like viruses, Asmi. They're like viruses. Like, we saw the during COVID, how somebody could be very innocent and catch the virus and even, perish. And so these ideas sometimes penetrate entire areas and they cause so much destruction and havoc. And we have to understand that as human beings, we are carriers, not just of biological entities, but also of intellectual entities that could be destructive. And that's why the Quran, the Bible, the Torah, all of them are focused on the idea of providing a whole other alternative modality of changing, of social change, the prophetic modality. Moses didn't lead an armed rebellion against Pharaoh. And the Quran uses this example as a paradigm, as a new shift of our consciousness. That's why we're given the story of Adam's two sons. These are the two paradigms. One who failed, who felt that his offering was not good enough. How did he solve his problem? He killed his
Jealousy.
brother.
Yeah,
Yeah.
got jealous.
And yet are shown in that very context, very condensed context of conflict and killing, that the other brother, a new kind of consciousness arises from the very context of violence and threat and fear. A new consciousness arises that even transcends the fear of death and of perishing, and says, I shall not raise my hand to kill you, for I fear the Lord of all worlds. That death, as Socrates said, in itself is not scary, but it is more scary to become a criminal, a murderous person. And so in these religious traditions, even including in Greek philosophy, we are shown that committing sin and causing harm to others is far more should be more fearful and scary to us than death, because death is inevitable. It's natural. It will happen to all of us. But as those the magicians in the face of Pharaoh said, when he said, I am ordering you to continue doing your magic, and they declined and they refused, and he said, I shall kill you, I shall crucify you, I shall destroy your communities, their answer was that اقضي ما أنت قاض إنما تقضي هذه الحياة الدنيا. They said, judge this worldly dimension. You have only control here. We are fearful of God, and we don't. And they said, we shall return to Him, and we don't want to be continuing in our sins. That على ما أكرهتنا عليه, like all the things you have coerced us to do, we shall not do them. That moment they became liberated. That's the moment of nirvana, when they became freed from committing sin out of fear, and they found a way out. It's very difficult, but that's why the Quran calls it the very narrow gate. فَلَقْتَحَمَ الْعَقَبَةِ فَكُّ رَقَبَةِ, the liberation of the neck. When it discusses that, and Jesus also said, tight is the gate, the door, and difficult and troublesome is the path, but it leads to life. So because we're all caught up in these paradigms of domination and destruction and of harming the other, it's very hard to discern this prophetic message of transformation, of reform, of awakening to our shared humanity and brotherhood and sisterhood.
So does compassion come in, putting ourselves in the, in the other space, that it's all us. We talk about being one humanity, the quality of sabr and compassion. When you are being oppressed, how do you deal with oppression? You've given me beautiful examples, and we've seen it in the Quran, but I'm saying in this time when people are hearing so much, seeing so much, feeling so helpless, anger comes in, people are talking a lot and wanting to, go out on marches or make groups together and stand up for justice. But there is in keeping the internal peace, keeping the sabr, being not just patiently, but also being persistent with what is right, persevering.
Yeah.
So, I'll have you talk a little bit more, Afra, about sabr and also compassion. Because when you're other, and to be compassionate, because Rahman, Rahim, where do we even feel compassion for people who've had those psychological wounds and scarring?
Yes.
So,
Yes,
and it
and
can happen to each one of us. We come from our human level, right? So that evolution or transformation where we can all help each other in our
it's
conversations.
very, very easy to confuse also like a sabr al jamil, beautiful patience, with complete submission and stagnation. The Quran differentiates that. Like when you look at the community of the Prophet in Mecca, they were heavily persecuted and they were oppressed, but they practiced sabr. When Bilal was like being tortured, he was
Mm-hmm.
being ahadun ahad, like one. He was like aligning to God. And Ammar bin Yasir actually ended up swearing at God and at the Prophet, and then he went in panic to the Prophet and he said, they wouldn't stop torturing me until I insulted you. And the Prophet said, if you have to do that again, do it again. He gave him permission to actually not 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 to have that kind of like superhuman sabr. He commanded Bilal for his sabr. He commanded Ammar bin Yasir for being gentle with himself. He allowed people to have these different methods of coping with these different forms of torture. And one of the ways he actually survived in Mecca was that he sent a big portion of his community into Abyssinia, because there was a just king, and Najashi. We always hear about this just king in early Islamic history who protected part of the Muslim community when they immigrated to Abyssinia. And the Prophet himself actually immigrated from his own city. And even when the Muslims became powerful and they took controls politically over Arabia, he never went back to his original city. And our history, the Muslim history, is called Hijri. It's the a migration history, because our home is not just a piece of land. It's our home is also our values, our community. And this
The
is the
moral
sad.
home, the moral home that we.
The same in Judaism. The commune of Israel is not just a piece of land. The commune of Israel is a value system. It's a community based on justice and the protection of others, and the refuge for strangers and for the oppressed to come into the commune of Israel, which they completely violated. And it's become now, when we hear the word Israel as an Arab, it just to me it has the connotations of oppression, of grabbing land, of illegal settlements, of using weapons and terror to actually ethnically cleanse a people off their land. My own grandmother, because I have a Syrian background, so my mother's side is from the Golan Heights, and my grandmother's small town village in the Golan Heights is now an Israeli settlement. It's a resort. And so these are painful memories for people. But on the other hand, we have to start thinking out of the box. We can't rely on violence and hurting each other to solve big structural problems. This is what's afflicting the region right now. And that's why, like, it is very sad that that when Assad got away with so much destruction of his country, and he targeted hospitals and schools and bakeries, Israel learned like the lesson that the bar has been raised on the level of destruction, because many people are saying this is unprecedented. They weren't targeting hospitals like this before.
And
But they
chemical warfare,
people
chemicals he used. He used chemical warfare on his own people.
he gassed communities, civilian communities, and there were so many people, because they're so anti-imperialist and anti-American, and Assad and Iran and Hezbollah, they have the rhetoric of being anti-Israel and anti-imperialism. So some people get deluded with such slogans, and they don't look at what the actual crimes they committed. So it's very like justice is blind, like that statue that
Yeah.
has.
Mm-hmm.
So we blind to our ethnic identities. We need to be self-critical. We need to be blind when it comes to who's doing the wrong. That's why the Quran says, be just even if it is against yourselves. Like
That's
that's
right. No,
taqwa.
no, it's very important, and it's wonderful to see so many people from the Jewish community, not in our name. They are the kind of heartbreak that is being experienced at a humanitarian level, because it is insaniyat. It is our common humanity that is actually bringing people of faith, not of faith, just people who care. Because I think you need that humanity first to have the compassion within your heart, so your heart doesn't get hardened. And that's what maybe this overdose can sometimes do. We all get lost, but right now nobody can escape this. There are very few people who can detach, as even when they try. The vibration is there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They're our teachers, those people. I mean, some of the most articulate, eloquent people who are critical of what Israel is doing are Jewish themselves. When we take like Noam Chomsky, Norman Finkelstein, Gabor Mate, Max Blumenthal, the family of Gabor Mate, his sons and daughter, and Miko Pilad. I mean, there's so many wonderful. Yeah, I mean, it's a long list. They are speaking out for Palestinians. They're speaking against is what Israel is doing. The same thing happened in Lebanon. Some of the most respected Shia mullahs spoke against Hezbollah and against Iran, and they said that this is not what Shiism stands for. Same thing with the Sunni world. Many people said that ISIS is not representative of us and of its hatred and ethno-fascism. And so there are always people who are speaking out, and it is when you look at really now, and then you see actually people in the Muslim world who are standing either by Israel or standing with the oppressors, and then you start to realize that we need to be discerning, and we need, instead of just creating these sweeping generalizations, Jews, Christians, Arabs, or Persians, or this, to actually listen to what people are saying. Look how many Americans came out and they're hanging on the ships that are sending arms to Israel. They don't want the ships to leave, and they tied their bodies around the ships. Look at I mean, a lot. I mean, it was Arabs who came out yesterday in London. Like almost 1 million people came out, and a lot of them are I mean, white Brits, and not just Muslims, Pakistanis, and Arabs and Indians. So we're seeing this shared humanity being awakened, and this as you know, as we see that this is also we see the divine manifest in this compassion and gentleness expressing itself in large numbers, and so we have to understand that when the oppressed are so desperate, they seek out, because they don't know better, they seek out the ugly tools of the oppressors. And that's what is sad about what Hamas did. And they didn't think strategically. I've read some young woman writing that, how could Hamas do this to us when they didn't have enough shelters, when they didn't have strategic backup plans, and leave a civilian population so vulnerable, walled off in an open air prison. And although it was heroic what they did for them, but it left so many families vulnerable. The numbers are staggering. 10,000 people, 4,000 of them are children. So we need to think strategically. Is that a way to liberate a people? It is so painful to see that. The same thing with Syrians. Syrians wanted to throw off one family rule for 50 years, a very tough security, brutal system. But they focused on a discourse of sacrifice, and they sacrificed so much, and yet Assad is still in power. And we don't know how much the cause of Palestinians will actually advance with what Hamas did. What's advancing the cause, if we have to be honest with ourselves, is the compassion and the sensibility and the discourse and the ability to challenge this arrested language, and to challenge racism and ethno-fascism and the Zionist ideology. That's what's actually advancing the Palestinian cause, not what Hamas did. In fact, initially,
it is the humanitarian crisis. Actually, it's the common humanity. I mean, today there's a march for children, that Hispanic community and the Native American community, and everybody's going to say ceasefire. So everybody's getting activated to do something. Where can my voice be heard? But it's a big unfolding, Afra, and it's a very troubling time, but also a time of great learning, of priorities, of what's important, and trying to weave it through with all this confusion. People are seeking, and people are coming together, and with breaking of hearts, light comes in, as Maulana Rum says. It's one of the things that kind of stays, because it is the same light, just looking different on different walls, and lots of shadows right now. So we just need to come on to the light as we go forward.
And that's the story of creation. Let God place us in heaven, in paradise. And then when we listen to the devil, we threw ourselves off. So every moment we have a chance to return to our
Because it's
nature.
all within us. It's the
Yes.
pharaoh within us that what gets
Yeah.
activated, we get triggered, we react, you know. So Afra, thank you so much. You and I can keep talking, and I know we will, but we've gone a little longer this session. I guess we've met after many weeks, and then we will talk about how often we can do this, because there's so many areas that need to be shared and explored and talked about. You know, we've talked about shukr, and we need to talk about, you know,
Yeah.
shukr, you know, and kufr, and we talked about stillness and action. So we plan all these conversations. And for those who are interested and want us to continue, your feedback is appreciated. Do share the word. We're trying to find a language in which to communicate, not just with each other, but with everyone. And hope that
Yes.
resonates. Thank you again, my Afra.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone.
Let's always remember that there's enough land, enough oxygen, enough abundance on this planet. It's just that we need to expand our concepts and hearts.
Our consciousness.
Thank you.
In God's protection. Thank you very much. And for the Auliya Council for this platform, and Afzal, who has organized this for us. I want to thank him as well. Okay.
Very grateful for giving me the chance.
No, absolutely. We hope to see you back soon, and stay well.
See you soon. Thank you for everyone who listened in.
Okay.